The morning I found out I had cancer, my sister was the first person I called. That was my mistake. I remember sitting in the parking lot of the imaging center on Broadmoor Avenue, still in my car, the engine running because I couldn't figure out how to make my hands turn it off. The radiologist had used words like suspicious mass and follow-up biopsy, and I had nodded like I understood, like I was a functional adult who could process information. And then I had walked to my car and sat down and stared at the steering wheel for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because my phone screen kept lighting up with a reminder about a dentist appointment I had at 2 o'clock. I called my sister because she was supposed to be my person. That's what we always said. She had been my maid of honor. She was the one who drove me to the ER the time I had a kidney stone and my husband was traveling for work. She kept a key to my apartment before I got married, and sometimes she'd just show up on a Tuesday with takeout from the Thai place on Clement Street, and we'd eat pad see ew on my couch and watch bad television and not talk about anything important. That was the relationship I thought we had. They found something, I told her, in my left breast. They want to do a biopsy. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, wow. Okay, what did the doctor say exactly?" She asked the right questions. She said the right things. She told me not to panic, that these things were often nothing, that she loved me. By the time I hung up, I felt almost steady. I thought, I have my sister. Whatever this is, I'm not alone. I drove home and told my husband. His name was Rowan. We had been married for 6 years. We had a mortgage on a house in the Sunset District, a Labrador retriever named Biscuit, and a standing dinner reservation at the Italian place on Irving Street every Friday night. We had plans. I thought we had plans. I told him sitting at the kitchen table, Biscuit pushing his nose against my shin under my chair. Rowan listened. He nodded. He said, "Let's just wait for the biopsy results before we worry." That felt reasonable. I told myself it was reasonable. The biopsy came back 2 weeks later. Stage 2, invasive ductal carcinoma. My oncologist, a small, precise woman named Dr. Okafor, sat across from me and laid out a treatment plan with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Chemotherapy first, then surgery, then radiation. She said the words "very treatable" and "excellent prognosis," and I clung to those like candles. Rowan came with me to that appointment. He sat in the chair beside me and held my hand and asked questions about timelines and side effects. On the drive home, he was quiet. I thought he was processing. I gave him space to process. That night, after I fell asleep, he texted my sister. I didn't know that yet. What I knew in those first weeks was that my husband started staying late at work, a lot. He had reasons, a project, a deadline, a client in from Denver, and each reason was plausible on its own. It was the accumulation that should have told me something. But I was starting chemo and I was exhausted in a way I had never experienced before, a bone-deep fatigue that made even forming thoughts feel like effort, and I didn't have the bandwidth to examine the reasons too closely. My sister, meanwhile, was suddenly very busy. She'd call, but briefly. She'd text, but surface-level things. "How are you feeling? Thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything." That last one, "let me know if you need anything," is the thing people say when they don't want to be needed. My neighbor, an older woman named Faye, who had lived on our street for 30 years, started showing up with casseroles. Faye, who I had previously known mainly as the person who grew very aggressive roses along our shared fence, turned out to be the kind of woman who shows up. She'd ring the doorbell, hand me a dish covered in foil, pat my hand and leave. She didn't linger. She didn't want anything from me. She just kept showing up. It was Faye who drove me to my 4th chemo infusion, because Rowan had a conflict he couldn't reschedule, and my sister had a work thing, and I had run out of people to ask. I sat in the infusion chair at the cancer center on Parnassus Avenue and watched the IV drip and tried not to think about how alone I felt in a room full of people. The man in the chair next to mine was reading a book, an actual physical paperback, which felt almost quaint. He was maybe 40, with the kind of face that looked like it smiled easily even when it wasn't smiling. He glanced up when I sat down, gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement, and went back to his book. I appreciated that. Everyone else in my life wanted to talk about it, or conspicuously avoided talking about it, but this stranger just read his book and let me exist without expectation. About 40 minutes in, I knocked my water bottle off the little tray table and it rolled under his chair. He reached down without looking up from his page, picked it up, and held it out to me. "Thanks," I said. "Sure," he said. And that was it for another 20 minutes. Eventually, he set down his book and stretched, and I saw the port on his chest, same as mine. He caught me looking. "Lymphoma," he said, like it was the answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud. "You?" "Breast. Stage 2. He nodded. "I'm Miles." "Tatum. How far in are you?" "4," I said. "You?" "7. It gets more manageable, the first few are the worst." I don't know why that mattered so much to hear from a stranger. My oncologist had said the same thing. My husband had said the same thing. But when Miles said it, sitting in his own infusion chair with his own port and his own battle, it landed differently. He wasn't offering comfort from safety. He was reporting from the same territory. We talked for the rest of that session, not about cancer specifically, about everything around it. He told me about his job as a structural engineer, about the building project he was consulting on in Oakland, about how he taught himself to bake bread during his first round of treatment because he needed something to focus on that wasn't his own body. I told him about teaching 3rd grade at an elementary school in the Richmond, about biscuit, about how I'd been stress watching competitive cooking shows at 2 in the morning because they were the only thing that kept my brain from spiraling. When the session ended and the nurses were unhooking our IVs, he said, "Same time next week." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a month. "Same time next week," I said. I didn't tell Rowan about Miles, not because there was anything to hide. I didn't think of it as something that required telling. He was the man in the chair next to mine. He was a person who had been kind to me in a waiting room. That was the whole of it. What Rowan told me, 6 days later, was that he needed to be honest with me. He said it at dinner, which in retrospect was a strange choice of setting. We were at the Italian place on Irving Street, our Friday table, and I had ordered the gnocchi because Dr. Okafor had said to eat whatever sounded good, and gnocchi sounded good. Rowan had barely touched his pasta. I had noticed, but said nothing. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. I put down my fork. "This situation, what we're going through." He stopped, started again. "I want to be the person who can do this. I've tried to be, but I'm realizing that I'm not built for it. I'm not built for hospitals and treatment plans and watching you." He stopped again. "Watching me what?" I said. "I think I need to leave," he said. "I think we need to separate." I heard the words. I understood them. My brain processed the meaning and connected it to the appropriate emotional response, which was shock, and underneath the shock something older and colder that I didn't have a name for yet. "You're leaving me," I said, "while I'm in chemotherapy." "I know how it sounds," he said. "Do you?" I said. "Do you know how it sounds?" He paid for dinner. I don't know why I remember that detail, but I do. He picked up the check like it was a normal Friday, like we were going to walk out of there and drive home together and watch television. I sat at the table after he stood up, and I looked at the half-eaten gnocchi on my plate, and I thought, I am 31 years old, and I have cancer, and my husband is leaving me, and I don't know what to do next. What happened next, I found out much later, was this. My sister had told him to go. Not in those words. She had been texting him since the night of my diagnosis. Long texts, the kind I would later read on his old phone when we were sorting through what was mine and what was his. That started as concern and shifted, gradually, into something else. She'd said things like, "You have your whole life ahead of you." She'd said she would want you to be honest about what you can handle. She'd said more than once, "You didn't sign up for this." He had needed someone to give him permission. She gave him permission. I found out 4 months later when a mutual friend mentioned seeing my sister and Rowan at a winery in Napa. She mentioned it casually, assuming I knew. I didn't know. But that was later. In the weeks after Rowan left, I existed on a very narrow circuit: my house, the infusion centre, Faye's front porch. Biscuit slept pressed against my back every night like he understood something was wrong. I called my mother, who cried and offered to fly in from Phoenix, and I said not yet because I didn't want to manage someone else's distress on top of my own. I went to work on the days I could, because my third graders were reason to get dressed in the morning, and sometimes you need reasons that simple. And on Tuesdays I sat in the chair next to Miles. He noticed something had changed at the 5th session, 2 weeks after Rowan left. I had said I was fine, the way you say it when you don't want to get into it. You don't have to tell me, he said, but you also don't have to do the whole fine thing. I'm right here and I'm also on an IV drip. I'm not going anywhere for the next 3 hours. I laughed again, that same surprised way. I told him some of it, not all of it, just that my husband had left, that the timing was what it was, that I was still figuring out how to feel about it. Miles listened without any of the expressions people usually make, the wide eyes, the oh my God, the instinct to fill the silence with something reassuring. He just listened. You know what I'd noticed about this place? He said after I finished. He gestured around the infusion room, the rows of chairs, the ivy poles, the muted television in the corner. Nobody here is who they were before they got sick. They're all the more essential version. The things they used to spend energy on, the managing, the performing, the editing themselves for other people, that's gone. You just are what you are. I thought about that for a long time after. He wasn't wrong. I was, in some stripped down and not entirely comfortable way, the most honest I had ever been in my life. I didn't have the energy to be anything other than exactly what I was. Miles had a daughter, 9 years old, named after his mother. He had been divorced for 3 years. The marriage had been deteriorating long before his diagnosis, and the illness had just made the necessary clarity arrive faster. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the outer Sunset, 12 blocks from my house, which we found out when I mentioned the taqueria on Noriega Street, and he said he went there every Sunday. That's my neighborhood, I said. I know, he said. I've seen your dog, the big yellow one. You've seen Biscuit. He walks that block like he owns it. It was such a small, ordinary thing. He had seen my dog. We had been neighbors in the loosest sense without ever meeting, and then we had both gotten cancer and ended up in the same infusion room, and the particular alchemy of that felt like something I didn't have a word for. My legal situation was messy. Rowan had a lawyer involved quickly, faster than I expected, which in retrospect told me the leaving had been planned longer than the conversation at the Italian restaurant. His lawyer sent paperwork. My lawyer, a brisk woman named Fiona, who worked out of an office on Geary, looked at the papers and told me we had more leverage than I thought. Abandonment during documented medical treatment is relevant in California, Fiona told me. It's not a fault state, but it factors into certain considerations around asset division. The house was the main thing. We had bought it 4 years ago. I had brought more to the down payment, money from my grandmother's estate, documented and traceable. Fiona was optimistic. I tried to let myself be optimistic too. What I was not prepared for was my sister. She appeared on my porch one evening in October, 6 months after Rowan left, looking like she had rehearsed the conversation many times and was already tired from the rehearsal. She wanted to explain, she said. She needed me to understand. I stood in my doorway with Biscuit pressing against my leg and I listened. She said that she had never meant to hurt me. She said that her feelings for Rowan had started long before my diagnosis. She used the word feelings like it was a medical term, neutral and precise, and that she had tried to suppress them. She said that when I got sick, she had panicked. She said that she had thought she was helping him, helping both of us, by encouraging honesty. You encouraged him to abandon me during cancer treatment, I said. I thought you'd be better off without someone who couldn't fully commit, she said. That wasn't your call to make, I said. She started to cry. I recognized this, the way her face moved when she was about to cry, because I had been watching that face my entire life, and I felt the old pull, the instinct to soften, to absorb, to make it easier for her. I closed the door instead. I didn't do it with drama. I didn't say anything sharp or final. I just stepped back and closed the door quietly and stood in my entryway while Biscuit looked up at me with his enormous patient eyes, and I thought, that's done now. The divorce was finalized in January. The house was mine. The asset division recognized my greater contribution to the down payment. Fiona called me with the news and I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and cried, but not the bad kind, the released kind. Miles had finished his treatment in November. His last session, he brought a box of the bread he'd been making, sourdough, with a dark crust that shattered when you broke it. He passed slices around to the nurses and the other patients in the infusion room, and there was a small, low-key celebration that felt entirely right for that space. No fanfare, just people who understood what it meant. I had 3 more sessions after that without him. They were the longest 3 hours of the whole year. I texted him the day of my last infusion. I didn't plan to. I just found myself typing today's my last one and hitting send before I thought about it too carefully. He texted back, "How does it feel?" I thought about it. Then I typed, "Like I can finally see the room I've been standing in all year." He responded, "I know that feeling. Coffee when you're out?" I typed yes. We had coffee at a place on Judah Street, 3 days after my last treatment, and we talked for 2.5 hours. It wasn't different from talking in the infusion chairs. The same ease, the same rhythm, the same sense that I didn't have to edit anything. It was different in only one way. There was no IV drip counting the time. We were just 2 people in a coffee shop who had chosen to be there. He walked me home after. Biscuit went berserk at the door when he smelled someone new, and Miles crouched down immediately and let the dog sniff his whole hand before petting him. It's a small thing, knowing how to greet a dog. It told me something, knowing how to greet a dog. At the porch steps, he said, "I'd like to keep seeing you if you want." I thought about the last year. I thought about Rowan and my sister and the dinner at the Italian place and Fiona and the infusion chairs and the bread Miles had passed around on his last day. I thought about all the ways a person could show up or not show up and what it turned out to mean. "Yeah," I said, "I want." That was 8 months ago. My sister and Rowan are together now, officially, publicly. She texted me about it in April. Another carefully rehearsed message asking for some kind of peace, some kind of eventual path back to each other. I read it twice. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will someday. I don't know. What I know is that I don't miss her the way I expected to, and I've been trying to understand what that means. Whether it means I'm healing or whether it means I'm harder now than I was. Probably some of both. Miles's daughter visited for a week in June. She is exactly as he described, opinionated and funny, and deeply committed to the idea that Biscuit should be sleeping on her bed, a position Biscuit was immediately and completely open to. I made dinner one night, pasta, nothing fancy, and the 3 of us sat at my kitchen table, and she talked the entire meal about a book she was reading, some fantasy series where the protagonist could talk to crows, and Miles kept catching my eye across the table and smiling. It was a normal dinner, completely, ordinarily, wonderfully normal. I turned 32 in July. Clear scans. Dr. Okafor said the word remission, and we both agreed to use that word carefully. The way you handle something fragile, but we used it. Faye brought a cake. She has never stopped showing up. I sat on my front porch the evening of my birthday with Miles beside me and Biscuit at our feet, and the summer fog coming in off the Pacific the way it always does in the sunset, slow and grey and soft. And I thought about how a year ago I was sitting in a parking lot on Broadmoor Avenue, unable to turn off my engine, And I thought about how the worst year of my life, and the year I finally figured out who was real, had turned out to be exactly the same year. I didn't know that was possible, that you could lose so much and still end up with more than you started with. Not the things you thought you were building. Different things. True ones. The fog settled in. Miles reached over and found my hand. I let it stay. There's something I keep coming back to. A year out from all of it, the people who left didn't leave because of my cancer. They left because of who they already were. The cancer just made the timing undeniable. My sister didn't betray me in October or whenever those texts started. She betrayed me in every small moment before that. Every time she chose her own comfort over my well-being and called it love. Every time she smiled at me across a room while keeping something hidden. My husband didn't fail me the night he asked for a divorce at our Friday table. He failed me in the months he spent finding someone to give him permission, instead of choosing to be honest himself. What I went through didn't create their characters, it revealed them. And as painful as that revelation was, I have come to understand it as something close to a gift, the kind you wouldn't ask for, but that changes everything once it arrives. I used to think integrity was a word for people who made grand gestures in dramatic moments. I don't think that anymore. I think integrity is what Faye was doing every time she rang my doorbell with a foil-covered dish and didn't wait to be thanked. I think it's what Miles was doing when he picked up my water bottle without making it a moment, and when he listened without filling the silence with reassurance he didn't mean. The people with real character aren't performing it. They're just living it, quietly in the ordinary minutes that nobody else is watching. What I had to learn, and I say had to because I did not choose to learn it easily, was that surviving something isn't the same as understanding it. I made it through the treatment. I cleared the scans, but the harder work was figuring out what I actually believed, what I actually needed, who I actually was, when everything I had built my identity around got stripped away. That kind of work requires a specific stubbornness, not toughness in the way people mean when they say you're so strong. That phrase always felt like it was asking me to reassure them. I mean something quieter. The decision, made over and over on the worst mornings, to stay curious about your own life instead of just enduring it. There is also something I want to say about the clarity that comes from sitting in an infusion chair next to a stranger who is fighting his own battle and choosing anyway to be kind. Miles didn't have surplus capacity for generosity. He was sick too. He was tired too. And yet he showed up in that room every Tuesday as his full self, present, honest, unhurried. Watching that taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way, that how we treat people in our most depleted moments is probably the truest measure of who we are. I'm not the same person who sat in that parking lot on Broadmoor Avenue unable to turn off her engine. I'm not sure I would want to be. That woman was kind and trusting, and she deserved better than what she got. But she also hadn't yet learned to see people clearly, to trust what actions told her over what words promised. I see more clearly now. It cost something to learn that. I've decided it was worth the price. The fog still comes in every evening off the Pacific. Biscuit still walks the block like he owns it, and I still sit on that porch, which is mine now, fully mine, and think about how the worst year of my life was also the year I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in it.